This is
Yeah.
very much related to what we've been doing, but we're taking a little bit of a step back by going through into this and looking at the actual build. What we're talking about as the building blocks of digital games. So we're talking about creating and designing digital games. That's cool. Um, but the question is, what really are the building blocks? How would you describe the building blocks of digital games without looking at the other the other slides I got there? So if you were, yeah, I mean, how would you describe? What would you say are the building blocks of digital games? You're making a digital game at the moment.
Yeah. I think the big one that jumps to mind is a game engine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I guess if that is sort of the glue, then I would start thinking about the different sort of areas. So then I'd think of something like a game design document, or a game design overview,
No, 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 no.
and
I'm just talking about
then
no, no, no. I'm not talking about document. I'm talking about just the game. Like,
right.
what are the building blocks of the game? Like, what is it that makes the game?
Yeah,
So,
I
game
guess
engine,
then
absolutely, yeah, yeah, that
game
100%.
engine programming, so code or blueprints,
Yeah,
and assets, um, are assets from
yeah,
2D, 3D, and
yeah.
music.
So, yeah, so of course, so we've got game engine, same thing. Game code, shader code, art assets, audio assets, story assets, etc., etc. So, there's a lot of stuff there, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So I guess so. Let's go to the next one. Um, so considering, these are this is what we're saying are the building blocks of a game. So how would you describe, if you want to describe your game to a player, how are you describing your game? Are you using kind of, if you're talking to a potential player, are you describing this sort of stuff?
Not like directly. It's almost like the the filter. Like they pass through a filter, right? So I'm obviously, well, not obviously, but I wouldn't instinctively start talking about the game code, but I would describe, for Arvo, it's a physics chaos game. It's a driving game. So the implications of the code that we've used, and then if I'm
But
talking
but
about
kind of nothing, nothing of this. You wouldn't spend any time talking to a player about this kind of stuff,
no,
would you?
not
Uh,
well, like maybe the art, but even then it would be more about what their relationship to the art is rather than the art
yeah,
directly
yeah.
itself.
So what about the development team? So that's kind of what I guess we're kind of getting to. How would you describe the components of your game to the development team, your artists, programmers, and designers?
Uh, I mean, high level stuff. I'd be starting with like the similar game sort of approach. So X game plus Y game,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then yeah, maybe referencing other art forms if I'm trying to describe a particular style, for the artists or for the sound people. Like if you want sort of like slapstick sound effects, or if you want big orchestra music.
Mm-hmm. That's it.
Yeah, I guess that's sort of. I mean, it's just sort of digging more granular from there.
Mm-hmm.
Start maybe using like specifying specific tools and techniques.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, I mean, what we're trying to get at is for a designer, how do we represent the building blocks of a game? So we can go back to this sort of stuff, but this, even though these are the actual building blocks of a game, they're not necessarily very useful, particularly for a designer, particularly at the highest level of the game. Things like the game engine, the game code, the shader code, are all going to be very useful and relevant to the technical team, to the programming team, for sure. But then again, how much, as the designer, how much should you be involved Should you be telling the technical team what their code should be? Probably not. You want a talented programmer to go and do the technical stuff. Same with the art assets. Really, if you're a designer, you're not necessarily an artist. You want to be able to communicate what you want to your artists without telling them how to do it, because they're the experts. Yeah, they're your development team.
Yeah,
they're the experts. And same with the audio. I mean, are you a musician? Are you an audio designer? Probably not. So you want to be able to communicate these things, story as well, to all this. So, and this is really complicated. You think about games that we've got, modern video games, really, really complicated. So describing them in a meaningful way is actually a real challenge, and we don't have a common language of game design, which is a real problem. So essentially, what we're looking at doing is using something called a game actor, and using what we call game actors as building blocks as video games. So a game actor is a meaningful abstract representation of part of a game. And as an example, a pretty obvious example, probably the most obvious example, is actually the avatar itself. So the avatar, if we think about it, it contains a lot of different things, a lot of those different, we're saying what are the building blocks of the game? Well, I mean, the avatar actually often contains almost all of those different types of things. So you've got the character model, you've got the shaders, you've got the sound assets, you've got the animation, you've even got a HUD in there. You've got movement controls, you've got camera, etc., etc. And some things, ways to interact with the game itself. So if you think about that, the avatar itself is a meaningful abstract representation of that particular part of the game. It's one we understand quite well, because it's a concept that it makes a lot of sense. But there's also, so another example here would maybe be something like a resource spawner. So a resource spawner controls the spawning of resources in the game world. Doesn't necessarily have a physical representation of the game world. Doesn't have our art assets, doesn't have sound assets, etc., etc. So in the game world, you've got a resource spawner here. It exists there. It does stuff there. But unlike the game actor, for instance, it doesn't have a character model, doesn't have shaders, doesn't have sound assets, doesn't have animation or HUD, movement controls, etc., etc., etc. It's just a system that controls the spawning of particular resources. Make sense?
Yes. Yep.
Really? I was expecting you to say, hang on, what? Okay, cool. That makes sense. Excellent. So,
I mean, it clarified in my mind when you did refer to it as a system, because that would be my impulse, is to reference that sort of thing as a system, versus the avatar where, in Unreal Engine, it starts as an actor, or maybe not specifically the actor blueprint is specific, but I can wrap my head around the idea of using actors as that catch-all for those elements, be they actors or systems.
Yeah. So it's a little bit, I guess it comes from the idea of object-oriented programming, where you have objects which encompass all the different things for particular, so the data and the methods for a specific sort of thing that happens. The reason I haven't called it game objects, though, is that it's a bit different. So often game actors will have the ability to work independently by themselves. So what we have here, if you can see here as well, genre and theme. So that's potentially, that is part of it. Again, I said that's sort of a high level part. But we also have art, story, and systems is the one I've sort of added in here as well. And that's it. So there you go. That's pretty much what we looked at before. But game actors must have one or more of the following. So art, story, or systems. So you can just have a game actor, which is just a system. But quite often you'll have game actors which include some sort of visual, audio components. They might have story components as well. And they're telling the story. and they'll have systems. So the avatar itself certainly has all three of these. The other one we were talking about, so the resource spawner, is really only a system on its own. But we can represent these visually from a design point of view so that we can kind of understand them and sort of understand how they exist in the game without having to worry about the complexity of what's going on inside that game actor. Make sense?
Yeah, I think this is kind of resonating with my hacking plan that I showed earlier. I feel like we naturally sort of stumbled into separating the tasks out by essentially what would be actors in that sense.
Yep. Cool. So some other examples, yeah. Just to sort of make it as clear as I can. So other examples of game actors. So for instance, a tree, like a non-interactable tree. Imagine you go into your game and there's just a tree sitting there in the middle of a field. You can walk up to it, you can look at it, but that's about it. So it contains just a polygonal model of a tree, textures and shaders to make it look like a tree. That's basically it. So it's pretty simple. So that is still what we call a game actor. So it's very simple, non-interactable. There are no systems involved. It just sits there. It's a decorator, basically. It's just a decoration. But that is still what we call a game actor. Then you could have a tree though as well, which say in a survival game like Rust or 7 Days to Die, which can be cut down and provides wood. So similar idea. So it's still got the polygonal model of the tree. It's got your textures and shaders, but it's also got systems which control being cut down. So obviously the systems are the code and stuff, but we, like I said before, we as designers, we don't want to be telling our IT system how to do their job. That's not our job. So you want to, one of the things, I think good designers do is they know when to stop. So they know how much information to give so that the tech team can actually build it. So sort of defining those systems, how to define those systems, and we'll look at when we sort of go a bit deeper. So we are getting into the weeds here, into the detail stuff. So we will look at how to actually how to define those systems, and the important thing to know is when to stop. So if you're a programmer as well, if you know how to do programming, it can be tempting to sort of go beyond and start doing the tech team's job as well, but you shouldn't do that. And so the final example I got here as well. So we've got the first two, just a basic tree, non-interactable. Another tree which is interactable, you can cut it down, you can get some wood. And then here's another example, still a game actor, but this one is like a forest. So a game actor which spawns trees in a given area. So essentially, all this really has is a systems to manage the spawning of trees, and that's basically what the actor is. So, shall I pause there? Comments?
Yeah, I might be preempting it, but
That's fine.
Are we, in that sense, acknowledging that actors can sort of be nested or have deep connections to other actors in that sense? Like the forest actor can spawn. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a very good question though. So yes, so game actors are hierarchical. So game actors can contain other actors and reference other actors as well. So you've got you might be talking about like the forest actor. You've got the game actor at the top. Then you've got the lower two actors there. Might be different types of trees or maybe various different things. So yeah, actors are hierarchical. They can contain other actors. And here is an actual example that I put together. Put this together when I was doing an analysis of Rust. So in Rust you have exactly this idea, this resource spawner. And you have a couple of different types of resources. So you have resources that are harvestable. So like our tree example, where you can cut it down and you can get wood. and you can see there you've got two different types of harvestable game actors there. You can have ore nodes and trees. Ore nodes will give you ore, surprise, surprise, and trees will give you wood. Yeah, another surprise there. But there's another type of resource there. There are also pickups. Harvestables need to be harvested in some way. So you need to have some sort of tool which allows you to harvest them. Whereas pickups, you just hit the use key or run over them, and you will pick up whatever they have. So there are ore pickups there. There are wood pickups. There are hemp plants as well. Ore pickups give you ore. Wood pickups give you wood. Hemp plants give you cloth. So that's a real world kind of example of the resource spawner actor. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Feel free to ask any questions.
I guess it's interesting seeing it broken down like this, because it is such a good reminder of, on the surface level, especially like from a player's perspective, it feels the same whether you're harvesting or picking up. Obviously there's a experience that is different, but the outcome is the same. You get the ore, you get the wood.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to see it laid out like this, because it's a great reminder of there are different actors, there are different systems that need to be used, which can be tweaked to change the player experience, that all sort of get hidden and buried, and you just see that output.
Yeah. And obviously your programmers need this level of detail. Like your programmers need, there's two different types of objects there, and you're giving them a good amount of information there. So, having a harvestable object and a pickup object, if they choose to use different objects and what have you, to do those, and they can decide how they want to, how they actually want to represent these things in their code. But you're communicating what is actually there and what actually needs to happen.
In this specific example, would it be beneficial? I might be wrong about how the game works, but I'm assuming that the wood that you get is the same whether you get it from a tree or a pickup. So would it be beneficial?
It's exactly the same.
To indicate that in this sort of thing?
Well, because it says the same thing, that
we assume it
is the same.
Gotcha.
I mean, this comes from a fairly large document. Where are we? Is it this one? No, I don't think it's that one. So both of these are... so this one. Resource gathering. So this entire thing here is an analysis of the resource gathering in Rust. So yeah, don't forget there's text and everything here as well. So you're not just giving them a diagram. You need to give them also, a breakdown of what's kind of going on here. So there's a lot more information within there. The diagram just shows you how the game actors sort of interact with each other, and the sort of overall, highest level there as well. So exactly that is said here. Harvestables need to be harvested by the player using a tool before providing resources. Harvestables require more time and effort to gather, etc., etc. So yeah, I mean, I think the answer to your question is yes. You do need to provide more information. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and there's a lot more, going into that here, but I'm not going to go into that today. That's for another time. So, okay, so that's a resource spawner in Rust. The other thing about game actors have relationships, and this might start looking familiar now. So, game actor 1, game actor 2 can have functional relationships between each other. So that's an important thing to understand, again, so that you can communicate to the development team what's going on without doing the programming yourself, but you're just communicating, hey, game actor 1 interacts with game actor 2. So, for instance, you might say the avatar can harvest resources. So there's a functional relationship there. The coders sort of know how to well, they know what's happening, so they can work out what they need to do to create the systems to make that actually work. All good?
Yeah, it's soaking in.
It's soaking in? Yeah?
Yeah,
You sure?
I think so. We'll
Cool.
find out. There's a quiz at the end of this, right?
Exam. There's an exam at the end of
Oh
trimester.
gosh.
Yeah, yeah. So also players have relationships with game actors as well. So this should start looking familiar. So we've got personal relationships, functional relationships, game actor, player experience, player. So you've kind of seen this before, yeah?
Oh yeah.
Maybe in this one. So if you remember this. So the thing to keep in mind is that what we've been dealing with in the past, however many weeks, we've actually been working with these, but I haven't sort of gone into the into the theoretical underpinnings within it. So the game itself is a game actor, like that. So the game actors. Remember, game actors are hierarchical, so they can contain other game actors. So we come down to the next level. Here we have the avatar, game characters, game world within the game actor itself. So it's a high level way to represent the building blocks of our game. If we come back, if you remember where we started here. Now, can you see the difference of trying to communicate what the components of your game are using these compared to using game actors?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of it is that, like you're saying, knowing when to stop. I feel if you're trying to use these building blocks, kind of the only way to be clear about what you're looking for as a designer is to basically start telling them exactly how they need to make their art or models or code their programs.
Yeah.
Whereas based on the actors, I do worry about ambiguity.
Yeah.
But I suppose that comes down to sort of that level of detail we already touched on, where it's like diagrams are really important, but you need supporting text to clarify the extras there.
And we will be looking at, so with the game actors are for us. They are for the designers. They're to sort of simplify the representation of the game so that we can think about the game in a way that doesn't get bogged down with things like code and assets. And you don't want to have to be thinking about this stuff when you're trying to understand the relationship of the player with the game. Who cares what game engine you're using? Who cares what the code's going to be or the shader code? These things are irrelevant when you're thinking about that, say, the relationship between the player and the game. So, but where there is the point where we have to drill down and give enough detail so that the technical team understand what they need to write. They need to understand the shader code they need to write. But when we're going through pre-production, when we're talking about sort of what sort of game we're trying to create, this is too low level. This stuff is generally too low level. So that's why we have sort of like a high level representation of the game, but also parts of the game. We can sort of break it down as much as we want to, and we can sort of use the concept of game actor. It's not necessarily a fixed concept. You can actually, as a designer, you can decide what parts of the game to be represented as a game actor. What we have here, this is the top level basically. So the avatar is an obvious one, game characters, game world. But within the game world, we're just looking at the spawner, tree spawner. There's a lot. Certainly in the game world, there's going to be a hell of a lot there. In fact, this is probably the biggest one because there's so much there. Avatar and game characters are important, but really the game world encompasses all of this as well.
This feels quite intuitive, the idea of the actors, now that you've helped spell it out for me.
Yes.
I feel like every successful interaction I've had with other game designers,
Mm-hmm.
without knowing it, it's because we've been utilizing that sort of premise of actors and their
Okay.
interactions with each other.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, there is still that issue that you touched on briefly, where because we don't have a defined sort of language set for it, there can
Yeah.
still be misunderstandings. But I think all the good game designers I've worked with have used a similar model of actor and relationship to
Uh-huh.
sort of map out the design.
Cool. Cool. Good to hear. So I mean, this kind of is a language in itself. I mean, this is like a formalized version of that. Um, I mean, if you were to use this same system, and of course, it starts kind of at this level, but then we're also talking about consistency between that, and then you can come down here, and you find exactly the same things down here. So you've got a game overview, avatar, game world, game characters, story, etc. Um, and so if you were to work, at one studio, and they were using the same system across different studios, then you could go to another studio and you'd know exactly what to expect. You'd know exactly what what people meant. So instead of having to relearn different systems, even if they kind of use similar ideas and what have you, I guess it's a little bit like using maybe one studio speaking French and another one speaking English. Um, same concepts, etc., but different kind of language. So trying to understand those is a little bit more of a challenge.
Yeah, I can think of an example from uni, um, where we were working on a game, and as the designer, I was trying to communicate this idea of the player being able to leave creep to do damage to enemies, and that's something that I've picked up from playing Binding of Isaac. Um, and the programmer was like, "I don't know what you mean by that. Like, that's not something I'm familiar with,"
Yeah.
and I had to break it all the way down into, but like basically starting to get to the programming thing of like how the damage works. And I guess, yeah, it's that what you're saying is, you know, if you're working on that same language, then, if they had played Binding of Isaac and I said creep damage, they would have been like, "Oh yeah, I know what you're saying. I know how to implement it."
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
it's just having a more formalized version of that and not just pulling random references to games you played some number of years ago.
yeah, for sure. And I will give you just a sneak peek into the more detail because I think it's probably worth doing that. But if we go down and say here, this is a pretty simple thing. This is a photo puzzle where the photo's been torn into pieces. Remember the one we were playing? Remember when we were playing it? And then the pieces of the photo were throughout the game world.
Yep.
So this is that, and so essentially we have more detailed diagrams at this level to help explain again to our development team what this is. And this is this is the lowest level. This is the sort of diagram I would be giving to my development team and wanting them to understand how that works too. So there's two of these here. This one's the actor relationship diagram. If you're a programmer or if anyone out there's done programming or has done database, you'll understand relationship diagrams, entity relationship diagrams, a bit similar to that. And then there's also the interaction diagram, which tells sort of which actors are interacting with other actors and the direction and what have you. So this is the lower level. This is the sort of depth we're getting to. And I wouldn't go any further than this. I think this is the sort of thing you should be able to give to your programming team, as well as obviously art team as well. But the programming team certainly need this level of detail to create what they're going to be creating.
It's interesting. I haven't seen this document in particular for a few months, I think. I had a look when I first jumped in here into this workspace and was trying to absorb it all. And it took me a while just staring at the diagram, checking with the key, going back and forth to sort of start building that map in my head.
Yeah.
But yeah, without the context of everything we've talked about today, I was able to get there. But it's interesting coming back with that knowledge and being like, oh, of course, those are the actors we've just talked about.
Yeah.
It makes so much sense how we've defined them in that sense. When I can see it back in this graph again, it's a little full circle moment, which is quite pleasing.
Cool. Good. Yeah, and I mean that's kind of what we need. I mean, imagine if everyone learnt this kind of system when they were studying game design or studying game
Oh my
development.
gosh!
And then you go to the studio and it's like, oh, we know exactly how this works. Yeah, I know what that diagram is. I mean, if you learn programming, if you learn coding, then that's what you know. Like like UML, Universal Modeling Language, or data flow diagrams and things like. You learn these things, but in game design, we're still, it's still a very young discipline. So we don't really, these things are not taught. Plus, I kind of just came up with it over the last few years, so it's fairly new. But yeah, this is the sort. When we talk about language, we're talking about everything from the highest level that we've just been looking at. So this highest level. So this is again. For the designer, you really, when you're starting out particularly, you're thinking, so okay, what sort of player experiences am I trying to create? How do I want the player, how do I want it to translate for the player? But then once you've answered all that, once you've got all these things, then it's like, okay, well, I need my dev team to build this bloody thing. So that's when you get right down into the weeds, right down to the detail, and you come up with this sort of stuff, saying, okay, this is basically what we're creating. And this is sort of the more detailed end of this. This still is a language. It's a visual language, but it's still what you would term as a design language.
Gosh. I just the example you give of imagine learning that when you're studying and then being able to go to a studio and see it being used, and I'm just like, man, what a world we could live in.
Look, hopefully it will happen. I mean, think of like architecture, blueprints. I mean, can you imagine being an architect and people didn't use blueprints? Like,
oh, sorry,
what the
we
hell?
use green prints here. Actually,
Yeah, exactly.
You have to learn a whole new,
a whole different system, or CAD. You had one CAD system that used a certain sort of way of doing things, and another CAD system that did something differently. I was like, well, hang on, why do I have to learn these different ways of doing it?
And do you think this is just an issue, being that game design is still young in comparison to the other design practices?
Well, that's certainly, you can't deny that game design is very young. I mean, it's a couple of decades old, really.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know. It's hard for me. I think a lot of my perspective before being sort of jumping into it, with the intention of being in the industry, it seemed more sort of understood as an outsider and a very young person, very young player's perspective.
Sorry, how do you mean? What seemed more understood?
Like a general design language for games. I feel like it's only been the past few years since I've been studying it.
Yeah.
And sort of really getting into it, that I'm like, oh yeah, this is really undefined still.
Yeah. Well, 100%. I've known that.
And so,
like, I've been teaching game design and development since about 2003, and it's like there's very, very little around. There's just very little around. But that's fine. I mean, things, this is one system. There will probably be others there. Most of the other systems that exist that I know of are in the academic sphere, and they're really complicated. I mean, I think this is probably complicated enough to try and teach designers. But the academic ones are like, they're for academics. They're like really, really, really complicated. Or for coders.
yeah.
The other one is coding. People have said to me, "Oh, why don't you just use UML?" I'm like, because that's for programmers. Like, programmers are not designers. They're not designing player experiences. They're designing code. Very, very different. Very, very different thing. So yeah, it is. It's a case of where the game design discipline is at right at the moment. It will change. It'll have to change because who needs to go and relearn a whole lot of stuff. You're basically learning a new language every time you change jobs. I mean, that's just silly.
I do wonder how this fares in sort of the very small scale indie scene. Just with, like, as I'm taking all this on board, I'm thinking about, how much of it I can kind of take for granted being the designer and programmer. Because a lot of this feels like, how do you communicate to the other departments in the team, the other people, what the goal is? But if you are your programmer and your artist, writing this down almost feels like a formality.
Trust me, it's not.
And I think
I've done both. I have actually tried doing both. I said to you at the beginning when we started this stream, you were talking about you just wanted to go and do something, and I kind of get that because it's funny. You spend time really focusing on design, and what I was feeling is like, I don't feel like I'm really doing work. I'm not getting stuff done. And I started getting a little bit antsy about that. And so the next time, when I was doing something else, I can't remember what it was, but I'm like, I'm just gonna go and make it. I'm not gonna go through this process. And it took a lot longer compared to. Well, the thing is, doing this way, when you go and actually code this up, it takes such a short amount of time. It's just like bang, because it's all the logic and all the relationships and everything. It's all there. You've answered all the questions already. Whereas, and the other thing is as well, once it's done, because the process of doing this, the first process is actually going and looking at what other games are doing at the time. So what's the, what if your game is inspired by another game, then you would go and have a look at, okay, so what are they actually doing? How they are actually creating this experience that you want to create as well. And you go through and you analyze. That's the first thing you do, is actually analyze somebody else's. And that's what I was doing here. I was analyzing this photo experience. I took that and then I went and built it in my own game, my own version of it. And it's strange. It's hard to describe, but for me, there was a sense of sort of solidity there. It felt different. It's very hard to describe, but it actually felt different compared to when I went and just started coding and just putting stuff together. And also I've had a lot more a greater sense of confidence that what I had done was what players would be expecting, because I went and had a look at what the sort of best games at the time were actually, the way they were actually doing it.
Yeah.
But you should try it. You should try it yourself. You should try doing both. See what you think. Seriously, I'd be interested to know if you go through the whole process yourself, do the analysis, build it, and then do another part of it. Just ad hoc is what I call it. Sort of doing an ad hoc method, and just see how you feel. Just see what your experience is. I'd be very interested to see what you think.
I think I fear there'd be some bias. Or some, it would be unweighted, weighted on one side, just because I am having to learn this process as I sort of apply it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that adds, at least for me, sort of an unfair weight to that end of it.
Possibly, but still, I mean, it's worth just reflecting.
And I really resonate with what you were saying. Because it's just what's been happening to me and Gemma, is we're trying to do this process of design, and feel like we're not doing work, in big air quotes.
Yeah, that's what it feels like, isn't it? It's like I'm not producing anything, I'm not creating anything. But what you don't realize is that there's a saying out there, which I think is very apt, that and it's from the programming area, and it's like a couple of months of programming will make up for a couple of days of lost design. So basically
Yeah.
saying that the more time you spend designing, like 2 days of design is worth like 2 months of coding. I mean, that might, obviously that might not be exactly the same, but it's a huge difference. The time you spend designing and preparing and not doing coding it really makes a huge difference.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's one half of it, correct? Because the other half is when you can do several days of design and have nothing to show except for a design document or some sort of design thinking, but you can
Yeah.
spend a couple days messing about in Unreal, you can spend a month messing about in Unreal and have something that looks like a game, whether that's fun or not.
Yes.
At that point it's down to luck, basically.
But
But
I think that's one of the challenges we have now. I think that's why we're seeing so many crap games. Like I was saying to you last week,
interesting.
there's 18,000 games that come out, and all but 2,000, according to How to Market a Game, Chris, were crap. So that's 16,000 crap games. So I would suggest, particularly, that as a game designer, as a game developer, or as a team of developers, you're far better off spending the time in the pre-production, doing your design properly. You're going to come up with a much better. You're going to come up with a much better product, a much better game, a much better experience. So don't forget, you can sort of at the top level, from the outset what is that relationship between the game and the player, and that's all that matters. If you manage to achieve that, nothing else matters, to be honest. If you do it well, that's fantastic. But if you don't do that, if you can spend all your time coding and never think about this and never actually achieve that, never give the player experience, never provide that personal relationship that you want to reply, never define it, how are you going to hit the target if you don't even know what the target is?
Yeah, and I think this is like the designer specific, right? I was
Yes.
watching New Frame Plus, I think, on YouTube, and he was talking about some animations he likes, and he was talking about Tactical Breach Wizards, which
Uh-huh.
looks like a fantastically fun game that I will play at some point.
Uh-huh.
And specifically touching on their breach animations, and he was saying, he likes them, here's all the little flaws with it. And then as he was wrapping up that section, he was like, at the end of the day, though, they have a unique breach animation for each of the characters.
Uh-huh.
And having that communicates more personality than one flawless one applied to each of them.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah.
that feels like the animator's goal, right?
Yeah.
Where the designers is the personal relationship for the player and the player experience.
Yeah.
The animators in that scenario is communicating personality. And so, yeah, I like that focus on you have one specific objective.
Wow.
And you need to achieve that. You can achieve that to different levels of polish
Uh-huh.
and through different means, but as long as you're achieving that at the end of the day, that's the job. That's
Yep. Absolutely.
it's good to focus on. Yeah.
And also, if you've got a development team and they know what your goal is here, they know what your goal is for your player experience, you're far more likely to get that because they know, like, oh, okay, Fraser's trying to achieve this, so yeah, I should do this. Particularly if you've got a relationship with him, we've worked with them before, and you start getting that relationship. If they understand what you want, they understand what you're trying to achieve, they're more likely to make decisions which give you what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, letting them be developers in their own right and artists in their own sense, and not just like automated little robots that you give tasks to, letting them make their choices. Yeah.
I mean, they're experts in their own areas, whether they're coders, artists, musicians, designers. And they generally want to. In a development team, you want to do the best you can. You want to actually create something really good. The worst thing you want is to create a game or an app or something, and it comes up, 1 star. Like no one wants that. So people want to create something really good, but if they don't know, what this is, they don't know what you're trying to create, they don't know what you're trying to achieve. They're kind of stabbing in the dark quite a lot.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, game actors allow game designers to visually represent the building blocks of games. So we started off talking about what are the building blocks of games, and I don't think people don't ask this question. It's just games are so complex, and cognitive overload is a real issue. So the building blocks of games, we have to find some way to represent them visually, as long as also with their relationships with other parts of the game in a meaningful way. So the meaningful way is really important as well. This is for your designers, this is for your team. The really important thing is that it's understandable. There's no cognitive overload there. Cognitive overload means things get confusing, and if you start looking at the different different things that games are built out of, it's really easy to get bogged down and confused, because there's so many little moving parts in a game. So so we're visually representing the building blocks of the games and their relationships with each other or with other parts of the games in a meaningful way. That's kind of what we're trying to do.
Amazing. I feel even more motivated than when we started.
Good to hear. And we've kind of, that's good place to wrap up, I think. It's been an hour and a half. We started late today. So yeah, good. So that makes, hopefully that now sort of puts the rest of it in context. I kind of deliberately left this off until we'd sort of gone through the other stuff. So I think that describing this, if I had have given you this straight up, I think you would have turned around and said, this is a load of garbage. I have no idea what you're talking about. Why are you saying this? You can tell me I'm wrong. But I think talking about it without going into the sort of theory of it and showing you how it actually works in a practical sense, so talking about the relationship with the game and the avatar and the player, the game characters and the game world, and talking about the relationships and everything. Before talking about the theory, do you disagree or agree?
No, I feel like a fish. Yeah, you got me hook, line, and sinker. You've reeled me in.
but doing that beforehand, like doing we've just looked at the these game actors. We started way back here. We started. This is where we started. I didn't talk about theory. I didn't really talk about anything sort of highfalutin. We just started this. If I had started with what we started today, do you think you still would have understood it and appreciated it?
I think I could have understood it, but no, appreciating it, definitely not. It would have been like, okay, sure, whatever. Whereas,
who cares?
Starting...
Why are you telling me this crap? I don't care. Yeah.
No, it's definitely... I mean, it happened... I mentioned it earlier, like looking at the Silent Hill PT stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It happened there, and that was just the smaller version of this. Yeah, having that sort of the goal as the designer into the actors and how we use those to further that and to be understood.
Cool. All right. Good to know. So